Marcus Sterling stepped out of his black Bentley, adjusting his expensive Italian suit as he surveyed the grand entrance of the royal palace. At 45, he had built a business empire worth billions, starting from a small tech company in his garage to owning multiple corporations across 3 continents. His wealth had opened every door, silenced every critic, and bent every rule in his favor. Today was no different, or so he believed. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Marcus approached the main entrance. He had an urgent meeting with government officials about a lucrative defense contract worth $200 million. This wasn't just any ordinary business deal. It was the kind that could cement his company's dominance for the next decade. His lawyers had assured him that his political connections and substantial campaign contributions would guarantee success as he strode confidently toward the entrance. Marcus barely glanced at the uniformed guards stationed at their posts. These were men and women who had dedicated their lives to protecting the royal family and maintaining the dignity of the palace. To Marcus, they were simply obstacles to be bypassed or ignored. His mind was focused on the meeting ahead and the millions that awaited his signature. The palace guard, Captain James Morrison, stood tall and proud in his ceremonial uniform. At 32, he had served in the military for over a decade before earning his position as a royal guard. He took his duty seriously, understanding that protecting the palace meant protecting the traditions and values that the institution represented. Every visitor, regardless of their status, had to follow proper protocol. Marcus approached the security checkpoint with his usual arrogance, expecting the guards to recognize his importance and wave him through without the standard procedures. He had grown accustomed to special treatment everywhere he went. Hotels upgraded his rooms automatically. Restaurants always had a table available, and airports whisked him through private terminals. In his mind, his wealth had earned him the right to skip the mundane formalities that applied to ordinary people. Captain Morrison stepped forward professionally, his voice calm but firm as he addressed the approaching businessman. The protocol was clear. Every visitor needed proper identification and authorization, regardless of their wealth or status. This wasn't personal. It was simply the way things worked at the palace. Security couldn't be compromised for anyone. No matter how much money they claimed to have or how important they believed themselves to be, Marcus felt his face flush with anger when the guard didn't immediately step aside. He was used to people recognizing his face from business magazines and news interviews. The fact that this guard was treating him like any ordinary citizen was both shocking and infuriating. His time was worth thousands of dollars per minute, and he wasn't about to waste it on what he considered pointless security theater. Marcus pulled out his gold-plated business card and waved it dismissively in front of Captain Morrison's face. His voice dripped with condescension as he spoke about his net worth and the important people who were waiting for him inside. He name-dropped. Politicians mentioned his charitable donations, emphasized how much tax revenue his companies generated for the country. In his mind, these accomplishments should have been enough to grant him immediate access. The captain remained unmoved, his expression professional and courteous. He had encountered wealthy individuals before, and their money never impressed him. His job was to protect the palace and everyone in it, not to bow down to financial influence. He explained patiently that proper identification and security screening were required for all visitors, regardless of their social status or business connections. This response only fueled Marcus's growing rage. He began raising his voice, demanding to speak with the guard's superior. His face turned red as he ranted about how his companies employed thousands of people and how his success contributed to the national economy. He threatened to call his contacts in the government and have the guard fired by the end of the day. The other visitors waiting in line began to stare, some recording the scene with their phones. Captain Morrison maintained his composure despite the verbal assault. Years of military training had taught him how to handle difficult situations without losing his temper. He continued to explain the security protocols calmly, offering to escort Marcus to the visitor center where he could complete the proper paperwork and authorization process. His tone remained respectful but firm, showing no signs of intimidation despite the threats. Marcus interpreted the guard's calm demeanor as disrespect and defiance. In his business world, people either feared him or tried to please him. This Guards' refusal to be impressed by his wealth or intimidated by his threats was something completely foreign to his experience. His anger reached a boiling point as he stepped closer to Captain Morrison, his voice becoming increasingly aggressive and his gestures more threatening. The situation escalated when Marcus grabbed the captain's arm, trying to push past him toward the palace entrance. His expensive watch caught the sunlight as he shoved against the guard's uniform, leaving wrinkles in the pristine fabric. The other guards immediately moved into position, their hands moving to their equipment as they prepared to intervene. The atmosphere in the courtyard became tense as tourists and staff members stopped to watch the unfolding drama. Captain Morrison's training kicked in instantly. He assessed the threat level and determined that the businessman had crossed the line from verbal aggression to physical assault. Practiced precision, he deflected Marcus's arm and took a step back, his voice now carrying the authority of someone who would not tolerate any further aggressive behavior. The captain's years of experience dealing with security threats had prepared him for exactly this type of situation. The moment Marcus laid his hands on Captain Morrison, everything changed. What had started as a verbal confrontation suddenly became a criminal act. The captain's colleagues immediately surrounded Marcus, their movements swift and coordinated. These weren't ordinary security guards. They were highly trained professionals who had served in elite military units before joining the Royal Guard. Their response was immediate and decisive. Marcus found himself face down on the palace courtyard. His expensive suit scraped against the stone pavement. The cold metal of handcuffs clicked around his wrists as he struggled to comprehend what had just happened. His face pressed against the ground. He could see the polished shoes of curious onlookers who had gathered to witness his humiliation. The same people who might have recognized him from magazine covers were now watching him being arrested like a common criminal. Captain Morrison stood over the detained businessman, his voice calm but authoritative as he recited the charges. Assault on a royal guard was a serious offense that carried significant legal consequences. The captain explained that Marcus's actions had been recorded by the palace's extensive security system, providing clear evidence of the physical aggression. Multiple witnesses had also observed the incident, making any denial impossible. The businessman's mind raced as he realized the gravity of his situation. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding that could be resolved with phone calls too influential friends. He had committed a crime in full view of witnesses and cameras. On the grounds of the most secure and respected institution in the country, his lawyers would be able to help him eventually, but the damage to his reputation would be immediate and severe. As the palace security team processed the arrest, Marcus began to understand that his wealth meant nothing in this context. The guards treated him exactly like any other person who had committed assault on palace grounds. There were no special considerations for his bank account, no exceptions for his business connections, no shortcuts because of his social status. The law applied to everyone equally, regardless of their financial worth. The other visitors in the courtyard watched in stunned silence as one of the country's wealthiest men was led away in handcuffs. Many of them pulled out their phones too. Capture the moment, knowing that this would become major news within hours. Social media would spread the images and videos around the world, showing the moment when unlimited wealth met immovable justice. Marcus tried to maintain some dignity as he was escorted toward the security office. But his expensive suit was wrinkled and dirty from his encounter with the palace courtyard. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and his face showed the confusion and anger of someone whose worldview had just been shattered. For the first time in decades, his money couldn't solve his problems or make his troubles disappear. Inside the palace security office, Marcus sat in a plain metal chair. His handcuffs removed, but his freedom still restricted. The room was simple and functional, with white walls and basic furniture, a stark contrast to the luxury offices he was accustomed to. Captain Morrison sat across from him, filling out incident reports with methodical precision. The captain's calm professionalism only highlighted Marcus's earlier behavior and made his outbursts seem even more inappropriate. The reality of his situation began to sink in as Marcus listened to the charges being read aloud. Assault on a royal guard, disorderly conduct, and disturbing the peace These weren't minor infractions that would disappear with a fine or charitable donation. His actions had been witnessed by dozens of people and recorded by multiple security cameras. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Marcus's expensive lawyer arrived within the hour. Rushing through the palace corridors with his briefcase and confident demeanor. However, even this seasoned legal professional seemed sobered by the circumstances. He had helped Marcus navigate complex business disputes and regulatory challenges. But criminal charges were a different matter entirely. The lawyer explained quietly that while he could arrange bail and begin building a defense, the incident had already become public knowledge. News vans were gathering outside the palace gates as word spread about the arrest. Marcus Sterling, the billionaire businessman known for his ruthless business tactics and lavish lifestyle, had been taken down by a single royal guard. The irony wasn't lost on the reporters who began crafting headlines about wealth versus honor, money versus dignity, and power versus true authority. Captain Morrison completed his paperwork with the same attention to detail he brought to all aspects of his duty. He had treated Marcus fairly throughout the process, following protocol exactly and maintaining his professional demeanor, despite the verbal abuse he had endured. The captain felt no satisfaction from the arrest. He had simply done his job as he had been trained to do. As Marcus waited for the legal process to unfold, found himself thinking about Captain Morrison's background. The guard's military decorations and commendations were displayed on the office wall, telling the story of a man who had served his country with distinction before taking on the responsibility of protecting the royal family. This wasn't someone seeking glory or recognition. This was a person dedicated to service and duty. The businessman began to realize that he had misjudged not just Captain Morrison, but the entire situation. He had assumed that his wealth would intimidate or impress the guard. But he had encountered someone whose values couldn't be purchased. The captain served something larger than himself, something that money couldn't touch or influence. For the first time, Marcus began to understand that there were forms of power and authority that existed completely outside his world of financial influence. The news of Marcus Sterling's arrest spread like wildfire across social media and news outlets. Within hours, video footage of the incident was being shared millions of times, with viewers around the world watching the moment when one of the richest men in the country was brought down by his own arrogance. The contrast between his expensive clothes and his position on the palace courtyard became a symbol of how wealth without character ultimately means nothing. Marcus's business empire began to feel the immediate effects of the scandal. Stock prices for his publicly traded companies dropped sharply as investors, worried about the impact on his leadership and the company's reputation. Board members called emergency meetings to discuss damage control, while his business partners distanced themselves from the controversy. The defense contract he had been so confident about was quietly withdrawn as government officials avoided any association with the scandal. In his jail cell that evening, Marcus had time to reflect on the day's events. The simple concrete walls and basic facilities were a harsh reminder of how quickly his circumstances had changed. His expensive suit had been replaced with standard prison clothes, and his gold watch and jewelry were locked away with his other personal effects. For the first time in years, he was completely alone with his thoughts, unable to buy his way out of discomfort or distraction. Captain Morrison went home to his modest apartment that evening, unchanged by the day's events. He had dinner with his family, helped his children with their homework, and read bedtime stories just as he did every night. The incident with Marcus Sterling was already becoming just another day at work for him. His wife noticed that he seemed more thoughtful than usual, but the captain didn't seek praise or recognition for doing his duty. The media coverage continued to grow, with news programs analyzing the incident and what it represented about wealth, power, and accountability. Social commentators praised Captain Morrison's professionalism while criticizing the culture of entitlement that had led to Marcus's behavior. The story resonated with people who had experienced similar arrogance from wealthy individuals who believed their money made them superior to others. Marcus's legal team worked through the night preparing his defense, but they faced significant challenges. The evidence was clear, the witnesses were credible, and the incident had been thoroughly documented. More importantly, public opinion was strongly against their client. The video of Marcus pushing the guard had been viewed millions of times, and viewers consistently sided with Captain Morrison's calm professionalism over the businessman's entitled aggression. As dawn broke over the city, Marcus realized that his reputation might never recover from this single moment of poor judgment. His wealth had protected him from consequences for so long that he had forgotten there were lines that couldn't be crossed, authorities that couldn't be bought, and principles that couldn't be compromised. The Royal Guard had represented something that existed beyond his world of financial influence, honor, duty, and unwavering commitment to service. 3 months later, Marcus Sterling stood in a courtroom facing the consequences of his actions. Despite his team of expensive lawyers and attempts to negotiate a settlement, he was sentenced to community service and a substantial fine. More damaging than the legal penalties was the complete destruction of his reputation and the loss of several major business contracts. The man who had once commanded respect through fear and financial intimidation was now remembered as someone who couldn't control his temper when faced with basic authority. The incident had cost Marcus much more than money. His children were embarrassed to be associated with his name. His social circle had largely abandoned him, and his business partners had lost confidence in his judgment. The wealth that had once opened every door now couldn't restore his damaged credibility. He learned the hard way that respect earned through character and integrity was far more valuable than the temporary deference that money could buy. Captain Morrison received a commendation for his professional handling of the situation, though he remained humble about the recognition. He continued his duties at the palace with the same dedication and integrity that had defined his career. The incident with Marcus Sterling became a training example for other security personnel, demonstrating how to maintain composure and follow protocol even when facing wealthy individuals who believed they were above the law. The story became a cautionary tale that was shared in business schools and leadership seminars around the world. Students learned about the difference between positional power backed by money and moral authority backed by character. Marcus Sterling's fall from grace illustrated how quickly a lifetime of success could be undone by a moment of poor judgment and entitled behavior. Marcus eventually rebuilt parts of his business empire, but he was forever changed by the experience. He learned to treat people with respect regardless of their position or income level. The expensive lesson taught him that true power comes from inspiring others through example. It's not from intimidating them with wealth. He began to understand that Captain Morrison's quiet confidence came from serving something greater than himself. Years later, when people remembered the incident at the palace, they didn't focus on Marcus Sterling's wealth or business success. They remembered a moment when character triumphed over money, when duty defeated entitlement, and when a humble guard stood firm against a billionaire's rage. Captain Morrison had demonstrated that some things in life cannot be bought, sold, or influenced by financial power, honor, integrity, and commitment to doing what is right regardless of who is watching. The lesson echoed far beyond that single confrontation in the palace courtyard. It reminded everyone that wealth without wisdom is meaningless, power without responsibility is dangerous, and success without humility is ultimately hollow. Marcus Sterling had learned that being rich doesn't make someone powerful, it simply makes them rich. True power comes from character, and character cannot be purchased at any price.